Hello, this demo is a quick overview of one of the latest features to be introduced into PatternFly Elements, which is full support for typography. If you visit ux.redhat.com/foundation/typography, you can see an overview of all of the styles and properties that we've assigned for different typographical elements within our system. And generally speaking, this page tends to take a design angle on things. So you'll notice in the first column here, the styles that are described are specific to different types of typographical elements, perhaps a quote or a card title, body copy, and so on. But over here on the right, you'll notice it actually says PatternFly Elements class name because we have introduced utility classes that will allow you to invoke these styles for both titles, notice it says title here, as well as text. So we're going to do a walkthrough of both how to utilize these utility classes, what those mean, as well as how to utilize the PFE typography mix-ins should you need to add typographical styles for a component. So first I want to show you the visuals of what these look like for the classes themselves. These are included in a style sheet, a separate style sheet called PFE typography classes. And if you throw this class onto any element on your page, it will invoke the font size, font family, font weight, line height, and margin bottom below that actual piece of text. So these actually all include an important, and because they are intended to be utility classes, you can throw them on anything and they will override whatever styles are already there. So again, we have title and then we have text. And you'll notice that there is some overlap in terms of the actual sizing. So for example, we'll see here that 18 pixels exists under both titles as well as content or body copy. Here's 18 pixels again. And this is an important distinction because as we start to look at the variables that control these different typography systems, we'll notice that there is a global, we call it a t-shirt size because it uses extra small all the way up to 6XL. So there are global sizes. Those are consistent. They always match up with whatever the pixel size is. The pixel size is defined here for convenience so that we can more easily understand it. But in fact, in the system, it'll print this as rem units, which is more accessible. But you'll notice that it's the same down here as that large t-shirt size equates to 18 pixels. But over here in this column, there are specific CSS variables for both title. So we can see here this says title large, and then this one down here says text large. So you can control these independently through the use of these variables. And then finally, there are separate variables for semantic HTML. Now this is included in the PFE base style sheet, and this is only applied to the actual HTML elements such as H1 through H6, and then this one is for the paragraph element. So this is an overview of just those classes and then the base styles. But then moving further on down here into mix-ins, there is a typography mix-in that we're going to get into. There's both one that says PFE typography as well as an alias that has this C here for component. And I'm going to walk you through both of those and how they're different. Both mix-ins have a variety of arguments so that you can control which kinds of properties you want to print. And let's go ahead and dive into that. So let's take a look at the mix-in, PFE typography, and then secondly, we'll look at its alias mix-in for PFE component typography. The first one was intended to solve for all of those text and title modifier classes, and so the defaults are set up such that it is printing many of the CSS variables that are necessary. So for example, here you can see in this small text, the first variable in the stack says PFE text, with the extra small t-shirt size, and then it falls back to the global size. However, if we were talking about a component, we wouldn't want to refer to the general typography CSS variable. We would rather have a component variable there specific to that component. So let's walk through this one first, and then we're going to jump to the component. So I'm just going to walk you through each of the arguments within this mix-in. First and foremost, we have sizing, which is an easy reference to the t-shirt size. So you could refer to the chart, find out what size you need, and then go ahead and choose the t-shirt size that corresponds. Next is the type, which can either be text or title, and the default is title. Note that this is going to control things such as font family. It'll choose the red hat display if that is your default title font family, or it's going to use red hat text, which is the natural one. Note that there is a difference between title and the text in the sense that text is the font family that's already on the root level of your whole document if you're using pfebase.css. So the expectation is that if we are defining typography for text styles, we actually don't need to redefine the font family. It's going to cascade anyways. However, if we are talking about a title, we definitely want that font family to be included by default. So that becomes important in our next argument here when we're talking about base. This is saying beyond that default sizing and then perhaps font family, if we're talking about titles, there are some other properties which you may choose to include. So things like font weight, line height, and font family. This is true by default, again, in this PFE typography mix-in. It is false in the component mix-in. So next we have spacing. This is controlling the margin bottom that adds space below the typographical element. So you can see here it prints with a not last child and not empty is the only time that this margin bottom will actually apply. Next, we have the important argument. And if you've been doing front-end development for a while, you've probably developed a nervous tick when you see bang important, because we know that that's really only useful as a last resort. Well, in this case, we are using bang important on those utility classes because the intent is for them to be sprinkled throughout the actual markup, and probably not in a template. You don't need them there because you're controlling that. But if you're handing out classes for developers to just kind of use as needed, we want them to be strong. We want them to override other styles that are on the page. So that is included there. Next, we have an argument called use local. This does a couple of things. What it's going to do, first and foremost, is change the variables that are at the beginning of that font stack that I already described. So instead of using a text or title variable, it's going to use a local variable. And I'm just going to scroll down quickly here and show you what that looks like. If you have local set up inside your component, looks like this, jump links perhaps, you'll notice that it actually will print the name of that local variable right here in the CSS variable. Secondly, it's going to opt out of the title and text variables. So you'll notice that the next one in the stack is global, font size medium or whatever the t-shirt size is that you are utilizing. So coming back up here, we also have a region variable. Again, that's useful for components. If we're talking about maybe a header or footer region, it'll put that in the CSS variable too. And lastly, we have this argument called light DOM heading, which is interesting because it's actually intending to solve for a piece of light DOM, perhaps an H2 or an H3 or a paragraph that you are using inside of a component. Because of course that H2 might have default styles already applied to it from PFE base or some other style sheet. And so you want to give the component a hook to basically talk to that light DOM directly. So if you set this argument to true, light DOM heading, you can see it's here. What that's going to do is print this PFC font size variable, and it's going to set it to the value of the PFE clipboard font size. So it's going to inherit from that. And what you'd want to do is then add like some kind of font size property. So what's neat about this variable is that it already exists as a hook inside of all of the H1 through H2 elements in our PFE base style sheet. So let me show you what that looks like. So we're inside of PFE base CSS in the middle here. And you can see it says PFE content H2. So we're talking to all the H2s that are part of general content. And you can see the font size declaration first and foremost includes this empty hook, PFC for component font size. And then it just cascades through the variable stack that includes things for the content H2 that's specific to that one, and then finally that global t-shirt size and a rem fallback. So this is empty unless we need a component to talk to it. And so then by declaring a value inside of this, PFC font size equals clipboard font size, we're then able to talk to any H2s, right? So this is where we connect the dots. So just to elaborate on how these two mix-ins are related, they are exactly the same. One mix-in just refers to the other. PFE typography just includes the regular typography mix-in. And really all we're doing is we're changing defaults so that it's easier to utilize this when you are building components. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to open up the PFE clipboard Sass file, and let's update this so that it utilizes this new mix-in. So you can see here previously it had a font size property, which was using the PFE local function. Great, it's referring to the map up at the top here, and it's defining one rem. And also, by the way, rem units assumes that you're using 16 pixels as the default font size for your whole page, so you may need to adjust accordingly. But so if we're assuming that we want this thing to be 16 pixels, let's go ahead and comment this one out. And then let's utilize this PFEC typography mix-in instead and see what kind of results we get. So I'm going to do include the PFEC typography, and then I'm going to ask for sizing of medium, because that is the 16 pixels. And then I'm going to update the type to text because we want text styles. And notice that over here, all that base styles are false, spacing is false. So really all I'm going to get, or all I should get, is simply that font size declaration with the appropriate CSS variable stacks. So if you see over here on the right, this did just update. So now it has PFE clipboard font size, so that's great. We've still got our empty local variable. And then we have the fallback for the global font size medium, as well as one rem. And you can notice that it's not actually utilizing this local map anymore. It's just looking up global variables. So if I change this to some funky number, it doesn't actually have an impact on the CSS over here. What we can do instead is just remove this from the map. We don't need to declare a value because we're just using medium to look up a value. And then this is all we need. Just real quickly, I'm going to show you what it looks like should I include base true. That's going to print font family, line height, and font weight. And you can see each of those have PFE clipboard at the beginning of the stack, and then a more general theme level variable. And then if you want to include, this one doesn't really make sense here, but let's do it for fun. We're going to do the region, and we're going to set that to header. And then we can see that our variable updates to PFE clipboard underscore header. And let's do another one. Let's try light DOM heading, because that is something that you may actually want your component, so these all make sense. And here we can see at the very bottom, it drops in, it maps PFEC font size, that component font size, to clipboard font size. So I think we're good to go. Just as a quick note about when you would override global t-shirt sizes instead of those title and text font sizes, I'm going to walk you through some Sass and kind of show you how this is put together for extra context. So I'm going to open my browser here. You can see where I'm at. I'm inside of the PFE Sass module, and we're looking at a list of variables. These are the sizes variables, and they're defined in pixels because that's a heck of a lot easier to read and understand. If you have a design background, you probably know what 16 pixels looks like. Rems are a little bit more difficult because they scale with the root, and so we're just going to start with pixels for ease. Then when we actually include these in our maps, which is found in the maps directory in PFE Sass, there's one for typography, we're going to include them with a Rem Conversion function, which wraps around the Sass variable, and that's what's actually changing them to Rem units. So the reason for this is because Rem units are more accessible. They allow the visitor, the visitor to your website to control their preferred font size. I mean, maybe they want to scale it up so they have an easier time reading the text on your web page, and so this will be respectful of that. Should you need to squash the rems for any reason, maybe you have an old website and rems are not going to work for you, you could simply do something like this at the top of your style sheet at the root level. You can just redefine these global variables and set them back to pixel values. So we had to do this on one of our Drupal 7 instances for redhat.com, but in Drupal 8 we are moving forward with rems, so we're not going to need any of this kind of stuff. So right here, this map that we're looking at is the global font sizing, that global t-shirt sizing. But if you continue on further down the file, you'll find other maps for things like the content blocks. So the H1 through H6, and then the default paragraph, as well as the small tag. And then further on, we have the modifier variables, so for title as well as text. So the idea is that you can override these independent of one another. If you wanted to change the scale of your entire system, components, body copy, everything, you could use these global modifiers. But if you just want to change maybe a few headings, tweak the H3s or tweak the extra large sizing for your body copy, the headings within that, you could just change these values, and these are not going to impact components. This is why we are omitting them when we call, when you invoke that use local arguments in our mix-in. We're just walking away from utilizing any of these CSS variables, and instead we're just using one that's specific to the component. So I hope this has been helpful. Remember, if you ever need to look up typography sizing, it is found in a markdown file in the documentation, so you can look it up here. This is what is responsible for generating this page. And hopefully this is useful to you as well, because you can kind of just copy paste this probable version of the mix-in that you need, which is the one for components, and then just the sizing and the type, and then go ahead and add arguments as you see fit. So last but not least, I just want to emphasize that the original functions, PFE local, PFE var, those still work great, and they're actually being utilized inside of this mix-in. The mix-in's job is just trying to make all of this easier for you. But for some reason, if the particular combination of properties that you need doesn't work out and the mix-in just is doing it for you, you can always go back to the font size declaration where you're defining the property within your component, utilize PFE local font size, and let's go ahead and add that back here to the local map. And then what you can do is simply, instead of defining one rem here as the unit that you want to fall back to, you could use the PFE var lookup to go grab one of those local sizes. Or sorry, not local, global sizes. So I'm going to grab this medium t-shirt size because this component was trying to be one rem, aka 16 pixels. So font size medium is just going to plug in up here in this local map. So now if I save this, this should actually generate the same results over here in the CSS. Wait for it to compile. But that should generate the same results as the include would have for this mix-in, with just the sizing and the type set to text. So it's just updated, and we can see that the clipboard font size is still the empty local variable at the beginning of the stack. Here's the global t-shirt size, and one rem is the fallback. So this is definitely still an option. I guess it just depends on your needs, your preferences, which kind of properties you need to utilize in your component. So hopefully you have all the tools that you need in your toolbox to get the job done. Thanks so much for watching.